Well, hello there. A few months has passed since my last video, and I'm back again with another episode of Swimbait Diaries. And this time around I'm gonna show you how I made my triple roach soft plastic swim bait. Obviously, first I'm going to draw the outlines, which I will then use as guides to solve the two halves off from the wood blank. After I cut the two halves, I then sanded them as close to being identical as I saw being needed, which is pretty close. I didn't see any need to be super accurate here because more likely than not I'm going to have to sand them again after the joining. Then I just mixed some 5-minute epoxy, smeared it on the other half and then just clamped them together. After maybe an hour of waiting, I unclamped the clamps and did some shaping first with a rasp and then with a sander. After sanding everything flush, I needed to draw some guidelines before I could start sawing the joints. And I believe I have them roughly in a 35-degree angle here. Next I needed to draw guidelines that would make the bottom and upper shape of my swing bait, and I made this template to help me out to get everything symmetrical. Then it was just a matter of cutting the excess wood off and again sanding everything nice and flat. Once I had everything nicely sanded down, I decided that it would be the perfect time to mark and drill the eye sockets. I then whipped out my German multi-tool and started to shape my roach and make it look more like a fish. When I was happy with the shape of my roach, it was time to start making the fins. And what I actually did was I went online and looked from Google some photos of a real roach and then tried to get the shape of the fins match the real deal as closely as possible. Once I had shaped the fins, I started to make the slots where I would then glue the fins in. And I'm sure there are a few people out there that will get a hissy fit again because I'm holding the bait in my hand while I'm drilling the holes. Judging from previous comments, apparently that's super scary for some. And what can I say? I like to live dangerously. Alright, now that the fin slots are done, it's time to move into carving some head details. But of course first I need to draw them into the bait. I think I have mentioned this in the past, but I like to start from the nose and then move to the back from there when I carve something, and I have actually seen some people do it the opposite way too, but personally I am incapable of doing it like that for some reason. I don't know what it is, but I just can't do it like that. But that just goes to show that there's no one right way of doing things, and you kinda have to find what works best for you. Anyway, before I start actually carving anything, I'm cutting along those guidelines that I drew earlier and sort of use them as a stopping point for the blade. Once I've carved the head details, I needed to do a little bit of sanding. Usually I start with grit 100 and then move on to 240. I personally don't feel that there's any need to go any finer than that. After the head details were good enough, I moved on to carving the fins, which for me are the most challenging part of carving these realistic looking baits. This usually takes me a stupid long time to do because I need to be extremely careful with the blade. Basically one slip and it all could be lost. For this project I decided to be a little bit more adventurous and actually hand draw the guidelines for the scales. And for the first try this worked out pretty well, even if I say so myself. And while I was doing this I did realize that I could get much more realistic looking proportions for the scales depending on what part of the body they were on, just like on a real fish. So in the future I will definitely be using this method over the scale stencil which I used in my older projects. After I've drawn all of the scales, it was time for my wrists and fingers to be exposed to some long-term masochistic pain and carve few thousand scales. But thankfully this did not last too long because the scales were rather large, thus making it a little bit easier to carve them. But I must say that there's sometimes days that I think that there must be something wrong with me for objecting myself to this kind of pain. But oh well. No pain, no gain, as someone once said. When I had finished carving those few thousand scales, I started working on carving the fins. And like I mentioned before, this is where I feel like I'm most challenged. And there's still some time to go until I get the fin carving honed to perfection, but until then, I think this will do. And at the end of the day, the fish won't really care how perfect the fins are. Only I do. After the fins were carved, I decided to separate the 3 segments and then sand them a little bit before I would glue in the risers that would go in between the 3 segments. So once I sanded the 3 segments, I made these 2 riser pieces that would act as a joint on my Swimbait and glued them on. And as I've never done this before, I kinda winged it when it came to the thickness and all of that, the technical stuff, which would then come and haunt me later on. Now that the glue had dried on the joints, it was just logical to glue in the fins as well. I left the joints a little bit short so that it would be a little bit easier to get the transition between the different pieces unnoticeable, and just build it up with some plastic putty. when I had the joints sanded well enough, it was time again to do some molding and build a 2-piece mold for my swim bait. I was a little bit worried with the joints getting air bubbles, so I decided to pour a skin of mold silicone on top of my mold master. Maybe wait roughly 10 minutes for that to settle and for most of the air bubbles to burst. And after that I just added a mixture of silicone and old mold pieces that I decided to cannibalize. And it seemed to work out pretty well. It's always exciting to open up a new mold and see all the details being transferred into it. I've made countless of molds throughout the years and it's almost magical to see it happen every single time. It's also equally exciting to cast or pour the very first bait on a new mold and see your handiwork for the very first time. Alright guys, I'm here to test out my roach Swimbait and made this thing into a line through version first, just to see how it works. And yeah, it does work. However, not really happy about the action it has. I feel like I need to retrieve it a little bit too fast because I was planning to make this into sort of like a cold weather bait. So when I retrieve it, I could be able to retrieve it very, very slow and it would have a nice action. But I think I'm going to be able to fix that pretty easily by just making the joints here a little bit more narrow, and should be easy enough to fix in the mold. Just have to probably reinforce these with some sort of mesh, but yeah, let's see how the thing works out. I'm pretty confident that it will. So maybe after a week of sitting on this joint issue, I finally figured out the easiest fix for my little problem. And I simply added more mold silicone for the joints to make them more narrow. And it worked out perfectly. Alright guys, I've done some modifications to the joints and this thing definitely should swim much better now. So let's see if it does. And I hope you're gonna be able to see it, but it definitely does swim much better now. And more effortlessly. So yeah, I think I'm ready to paint some soft plastic So let's go and see that next. I'm sure someone is going to ask me again what paints I use, and currently I'm using soft plastic paints from Cap Coatings, and they are actually officially out now. So what I think I will do is I will leave a link to the description so you guys can go and see the website yourself. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and I guess that's pretty much all from me now again. So I will see you guys on the next video.